Whenever perfection is ever discussed in relation to video games, the age-old saying, "no game is without flaw," is always brought up. And this is sort of true, no game is ever flawless. However, I still believe that there can be perfect games, when the game has no major faults, and what little faults it does have can be overlooked. In my opinion, Spelunky is one of these games. Now, this doesn't mean that to make every game perfect for me, it should be randomly generated and have permadeath and be riddled with bullshit. No, I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that every game should strive to follow Spelunky's design philosophy, taking an incredibly simple concept and then building upon it, and then build upon it further, and then continue to build on it until every part of the game revolves around it. This is usually where I'd place a spoiler warning telling you to go play the game if you haven't already. However, because of the randomly generated levels, it's pretty much impossible to spoil much of the experience, and Spelunky was already a game that relied on the community interacting with each other and discovering the game's secrets. We'll get to this in a bit. The true joy of Spelunky is mastering the controls and then conquering the game, which is something that cannot be possibly spoiled. However, if you really don't want the game's secrets to be spoiled, I'll place a spoiler warning here so I can't get yelled at for revealing anything. I'm going to assume that everyone watching this has either played Spelunky already or knows what it's about. But for those who aren't in either of these camps, let's quickly go over the premise of the game. Spelunky is a 2D platformer with randomly generated levels and permanent death. The aim is to get to the exit of each level until you eventually reach the guardian of the treasure, Olmec. Defeating Olmec grants you the grave's treasure and then you win. That's it. That's the whole game spoiled in a few short sentences. Don't take this simple idea lightly, however, as the journey to the treasure is incredibly treacherous. Almost everything in Spelunky wants you dead. Some will deal a flat amount of damage to killing you when you eventually reach zero, but many individual traps and some crazy sequences in the game will kill you on the spot. This is where majority of Spelunky's challenge comes from, and is also the part of the game that is criticized the most. Turns out, being instantly killed after 15, 20, even 30 minutes of play is frustrating, and I too, in my 150 hours of playing the game, have Alt F4'd many times after succumbing to Spelunky's utter bullshit. But this decision to include these bullshit deaths is ultimately the correct one, as the rest of the game is built around it. I want to add in this clip I recorded when getting extra footage for the video, because despite me just defending the game for including bullshit deaths, there are deaths like this that can happen. Nearly every single death in Spelunky is the result of a misstep you've taken, yet here I've yet to add a millisecond to my level timer before I'm dead. I learnt nothing from this death, the game just outright killed me without a second thought, and for those who are still confused at what happened, I'll break it down. This crocodile enemy teleports when he takes damage. He spawned next to this arrow trap, and when he moved, the arrow trap triggered, causing him to teleport, and he randomly teleported on the same square I was on, and the game deleted me to make room. This is known as telefragging, and you can do this too with a teleporter. And while yes, this is completely bullshit, this is the first time the game has killed me upon entering a level. This is not a normal way of the game killing you, despite what many people may believe, and 99% of the time you die because of a mistake you've made. The game is incredibly punishing of these mistakes and is one of the major flaws of the game. It's impossible for me to rightfully defend deaths like these and the punishing nature of the game. It's a flaw I've decided that can be overlooked, and I'll try to explain why later. Spelunky introduces itself, like many other games, with a forced, tedious tutorial, which is one of the game's two ways of being accessible while staying true to its roots. The game simply tells you the controls through very obvious billboards, and then you show the game that you understand that mechanic at face value. Walking, running, jumping, climbing, throwing bombs, lifting items, and purchasing items at shops are all shown and explained to you, and then the game leaves you to explore the rest of the controls. Explore the rest of the controls? The game told me all the controls already. Spelunky's brilliance comes from its complexity. It's present in all aspects of the game, and is a reason why a game all about simple platforming with simple obstacles is so highly regarded. The game doesn't tell you all the tips and tricks you can accomplish with the basic controls, such as a whip doing damage by touching enemies, rather than just the part of it. Or that moving at running speed doesn't require a running start, you just hold the button and you instantly accelerate. You can cook bombs, grab ledges without dropping your held item by walking off the ledge and then turning to grab it. You can use your rope to damage enemies directly above you. There are many more tricks that I might not even know about that you can implement in the game, which all increase your odds of surviving in this cruel world, and it proves how much complexity can be wringed out of seemingly simple concepts. The beautiful thing about Spelunky is that you aren't required to learn any of these expert tips. The entire game can be beaten using the controls at face value, even giving fresh players a fighting chance of beating the game early on. After you've completed the tutorial, you're thrown into the game. It gives you enough knowledge to move around, says good luck, and then proceeds to skullfuck you for the next few hours. This can be discouraging for inexperienced players, as they're going to be killed a lot, and they'll be making next to no progress while it happens. This isn't exactly true. The progress of Spelunky is the lessons you learn from every death, and what you learn can be implemented into future runs. Spiders always jump in the same height to the same rhythm, bats always chase you directly once you descend below them, and arrow traps always trigger due to motion from anything, regardless of its living status. You won't know this on your first time through, however. You'll likely die to it, and then die to it again, and then die to it again, until you finally learn how to evade it. It's quite funny actually, because Spelunky embraces the exact same thing that I criticized Cuphead for, a reliance over trial and error gameplay to inflate its difficulty. And yes, Spelunky does fall into this trap, and the learning curve is incredibly frustrating, but where Cuphead fails in its execution is because its bosses randomly changes entire aspects of the fight. If Spelunky's spiders didn't have a rhythm and instead randomly jumped at you, I would probably criticize it as much as I did in Cuphead, arguably even more so since you can lose far more than a minute or two of progress for a death. Rules remain consistent, and the situations you encounter will likely appear again, and you can use that past mistake to tackle it in a different way. It's this progression of knowledge and increase of player skill that acts as the game's progress, even if that progress is made at a snail's pace, very much unlike dying, which is more akin to a race car. And once you have died, restarting is easy. You start at the main entrance, or you can quick restart at whatever tunnel you started at, either the mines, jungle, ice caves, or the temple. These are the 4 main levels of the game, and it's the levels that are the heart and soul of it. Traversing these environments, evading traps, killing monsters, and collecting gold. So let's spend some time explaining how the randomly generated levels are designed. Well, this isn't exactly true. Yes, the levels are randomly generated, but they're also not. Let me explain. Each level is split into a 4x4 grid, forming 16 tiles. The level generator spits out a path between one of the top 4 tiles and one of the bottom 4 tiles, leaving a path from entrance to exit without any obstruction. Then the level places in handcrafted rooms on these tiles, creating the level. I believe this process is explained in Derek Yu's book, Derek being the mastermind behind Spelunky, and while I haven't read the book myself, this is something I picked up on because I've played the mines levels over 1700 times. It was this specific room, the ladders with 2 corridors, that got me first started on this theory. The ladders were always the same height every time, which would be very improbable to experience if it was purely randomized. Then I started seeing more familiar rooms I'd seen elsewhere, this configuration, repeatedly. This room with the 2 explosive kegs, this alcove with a slight dip to it, this starting room with stairs one way down and the way forward underneath. They were always arranged in the same way, every time I encountered them, so I'm pretty sure that this is the case. So, in this strange way, you can actually learn the level, and I've even found myself autopiloting on the mines and some jungle levels because I've played them so many times. I don't think this was the intention, however. I believe this is used to keep the game fair. With a randomizer for something as complicated as Spelunky, you could end up with some complete bullshit levels. By utilizing handcrafted rooms alongside a random layout, levels are always unique, yet they're always built around the core challenge of the game: evading traps, killing monsters, and collecting gold. This is where we reach one of the core criticisms about Spelunky. The game is all about evading traps, killing monsters, and collecting gold, which are all linked to exploring, and people would want to explore the levels completely, every inch of them, but they're not allowed to. This is a bit of criticism that I personally believe is absurd. From the very beginning, I believe it is obvious that you're not supposed to explore every nook and cranny. You start with only 4 bombs and ropes, and it often takes at least 1 to access these sectioned off areas, not to mention the potential cost in health. If you explored everywhere, you'd very quickly run out of supplies. This is one of the core challenges of Spelunky, weighing the cost of entering an optional area against the potential gain. Some players might not see this going into the game, and after rereading the first paragraph of its Steam store page, it's hard to blame them. It reads as a randomly generated collectathon, where you can leisurely explore every level, evade traps, kill monsters, and collect treasure, a gift that keeps on giving. Spelunky is anything but leisurely, and many players might not realize going into it that they have a 4th resource to manage: time. You technically have an unlimited amount of time going into each level. There's nothing that forces you to the next level if you spend too much time exploring, that after 2.5 minutes a ghost spawns that relentlessly chases you. It can phase through blocks, and if it catches you, it instantly kills you. The ghost is slow moving, you can very easily outrun it, but the layout of many of the levels mean that the ghost can block your only way forward, essentially trapping you if you don't have the supplies or the knowledge to outsmart it. For new players, the ghost is essentially a punishment for spending too much time in a level. There is a benefit if the ghost touches a gem that converts it to a diamond, which is worth a lot of gold. But is it really worth it? It's also impossible to know how much time you've used in a level unless you turn on the Pro HUD in the settings, which I recommend since the original HUD can block your vision. But I can't expect new players going into the game using this, as even in the Pro HUD, there's no countdown timer indicating, hey look, the ghost is coming to beat your ass. It's something that you can only know it exists once you've experienced it, which is incredibly frustrating, and it's a shame to see so many people shy away from the game based on this single mechanic. But while the ghost might seem like this unavoidable threat of instant death for playing cautiously, it's anything but that. The ghost simply punishes you for playing extremely cautiously, preventing players from moving through every level at a snail's pace. Which is why I can't justify removing the ghost, as so many people have requested. The ghost is the only way Spelunky punishes cautious play, which is otherwise rewarded. By inching your way through the level, luring enemies away from each other to remove them one by one, and cautiously checking every block before every jump, it would be extremely easy to break Spelunky. There's no reason to jump face first into danger, just take your time and triple check every jump before you make it. Why the hell not? Why risk attacking 3 enemies at a time when you can take your time and deal with them individually? Playing cautiously is the optimal way to play the game, and you can't really punish that style of play either. This is where the ghost comes in to discourage this style of play. You can still move extremely cautiously, but every second you spend double checking every block is another second closer to facing the ghost, forcing players to move faster. You might call enforcing a playstyle on its players a bad thing. Players came to play a game the way they want to play it. This rings true for sandbox style games. Imagine if Minecraft had one straightforward way that every player has to follow to play it. But for a tightly designed game such as Spelunky, keeping everything balanced is far more important. The ghost is just part of that steep learning curve that the game imposes upon inexperienced players, most of which can't be taught outside of trial and error. Red frogs explode a while after you kill them. Do you learn that any other way outside of seeing it explode? Nope. Scorpions sleep ferociously after you. Can you learn this apart from seeing this? Absolutely not. Psychic beams are an instant kill. You can only learn this the hard way. Spelunky's learning curve is all about trial and error, seeing things, dying to them, and then learning from them. I won't shy away from the truth. This learning curve is very, very frustrating to overcome, and it's a full of trial and error gameplay in general. Where Spelunky succeeds in utilizing trial and error is that every death is a lesson that can be implemented into future runs. The world's rules never change. Being thrown headfirst into the world that will relentlessly skullfuck you for hours is ultimately the best thing the game can do. It's the same world that you'll conquer when you eventually beat the game. The only question is this: are you ready to endure the pain? Thankfully, Spelunky isn't entirely a monster. There's a good Samaritan out there trying to save your ass, or mouth, from the skullfucking pain that is overcoming the learning curve. On your first time playing, you'll encounter Tunnel Man between worlds. He's digging his way to each of the 4 main areas of the game, and while digging, he'll run into a handful of problems. He'll need a handful of supplies and some other items so he can complete these tunnels for your use, allowing you to begin a run at the start of one of the main worlds instead of always starting at the mines. These tunnels are a very smart inclusion to the game, giving the players some short-term goals to work towards while they're learning the game, as well as some extra challenges that teaches the player skills they'll need to beat the game beginning from the mines. Survive through these 4 levels. Now survive through these levels again without using too many bombs. Now without using too many ropes. Now take the golden key from the mines all the way to the temple. You might not realize it at first, but the game is trying to teach you how to conserve resources, ropes, bombs, and time, using the reward of a shortcut as the incentive for players to do so. But it's not just unlocking the shortcuts that allows players to learn. Using the shortcuts themselves are only there to aid in overcoming the learning curve. As I mentioned earlier, being killed by bullshit 15, 20, even 30 minutes deep into a run is very frustrating. So imagine a new player finally overcoming their journey through the jungle, 20 minutes deep, only to be thrown into the abyss 20 seconds later. Ultra throwing sounds pretty good. By allowing players to start at the ice caves, it gives them a chance to learn what dangers await them by allowing them to succumb to them without the 20-minute time commitment. It encourages players to experiment, something that they would be too afraid to in a run from the mines because one small misstep could send them all the way back there. The way I played Spelunky the first time through is the way I would recommend to everyone playing it the first time. I would start at the mines, and while learning the mines I would unlock the jungle shortcut, then start playing the jungle levels until I had learnt the jungle levels, and then unlock the ice cave shortcut, so on and so forth, all the way until I defeated Olmec for the first time by using the temple shortcut. This had given me a lot of knowledge about each of the 4 main worlds, so when I started exclusively from the mines, I wasn't making the rookie mistakes that I was making when I was using the shortcuts. Granted, I was still making mistakes, I still am after 150 hours, but they're far less frequent. The game giving me a chance to ease into levels so I was prepared when I dived into them for real is the only way Spelunky could guide me into learning the game, learning all the tricks the game had hidden within. This is what the learning curve of Spelunky is all about, your ever-growing knowledge and mastery over the game. I also think this is the exploration part of the game as well, because for Spelunky's case more than ever, I don't think this was supposed to be a game you played entirely on your own, which is why I said earlier that you can't really spoil Spelunky. Exploration doesn't mean just explore all 16 tiles of each level to progress, it also means explore all the crevices and cracks and find all the secrets the game has to offer. These secrets are so ridiculously hidden that it will be next to impossible for one single player to find them all. Like on the jungle levels when the dead are restless, you can blow up the king's grave to reveal a secret entrance to the haunted castle, or by throwing a damsel into this thing, then jump in, you'll be consumed by a worm and be forced to escape it. Or to get to the final area of the game, hell, you have to obtain the Ujat Eye in the mines, which acts as a dowser for the entrance to the black market in the jungle, where you can purchase the Ankh for $50,000, or take it by force. And then by dying on a level in the ice caves when a Moai statue is present, the Ankh will resurrect you inside the statue, allowing you to collect the Hedjet, which when combined with the scepter you take from Anubis' cold dead hands, acts as a key to open the locked entrance to the City of Gold, where you find the Merlinomicon and kill Anubis II to awaken it, which then opens the door to Hell, and you can enter that door by using Olmec's head as a platform. I have no fucking idea how any one person is supposed to discover that. The chances of that are basically impossible, yet the chances that the entire community could find that out is more likely. Spelunky is something that relied on forums and data mining to discover all of its secrets, and I believe that this was the advertised exploration, and many people who tried to play the game for the first time today will completely miss this. I think everything has been discovered, although I could very well be wrong, and new players will more than likely just look up all the game's secrets from walkthrough without the experience of playing the game when these were discovered. It's only something that can be accomplished at the time of the game's release. Does this mean that Spelunky is completely unplayable? Absolutely not. Spelunky is all about getting to the secrets, it's all about the journey and whether you can endure it. So using forums and walkthroughs to gain the knowledge is perfectly acceptable. Someone else did the hard yards to discover all that, why should you? This might be cheating in a lot of people's eyes, using walkthroughs and guides to help you learn the game, and I too despise using walkthroughs. Despite that, I would always recommend doing this for beginners because of how unforgiving the learning curve is even after you've read every guide that's ever been written. At the end of the day, Spelunky is just all about playing it, which is something that guides cannot possibly spoil, and even if you're intent on learning the game without using any guides, you'll likely be forced to resort to them to learn about any of the secrets I just explained. I don't think it's reasonable to expect someone to completely beat Spelunky blind, and I looked up many of these secrets as well. The only ones I stumbled upon were the monkeys. Many roguelites do a similar thing with a discovery aspect of the game that's shared online so others can learn about them, although I don't think any hid them as deeply as Spelunky did. And while I'm writing this, almost 4,000 words deep into the script, I haven't even begun to explain why I think this game is perfect. I've just been explaining it and defending it, and I feel as if it's necessary for me to do this. Spelunky was a very influential game when its release, both its 2012 HD release and the 2008 freeware release, and it's often regarded to as the blame for the boom in roguelike games, as well as The Binding of Isaac and some other game whose name escapes me. Spelunky has been criticized for including quick deaths just to make the game harder, to elongate the playtime of a simple and straightforward premise, to frustrate its player base. And while it does all of those things, I don't think it was the intention when it was included. Quick deaths are included in the game for a far greater reason than just to make it harder. It's to balance it. Balance is one of the most important things in a video game. If your game is imbalanced in the player's favour or the game's favour, it either makes the game too easy and not enjoyable, or makes it near impossible to complete. and not enjoyable. Spelunky is a very imbalanced game. There are many items that you can obtain that completely favors the player, but since the game can threaten an instant kill pretty much whenever it wants, which is itself imbalanced, it sort of balances itself out. I know a lot of people are going to strongly disagree with what I just said, that there's many parts of the game that completely favors the player, almost to the point of making the game easier. So I'm going to illustrate exactly why this is. Let's take a look at the most broken item in the game, the Kapala. The Kapala is obtained by gaining favor with Kali by sacrificing bodies on her altars. 2 damsels or 16 points worth of favor is enough to get you this completely broken item. What it does is allows you to collect the blood of your enemies. 8 drops fills this glass and then grants you 1 health. This has infinite uses and isn't a rare item by any means either. Altars are quite common and damsels and corpses even more so. With careful play, it's very easy to recover at least 1 point of health every level, and I've even managed to recover far more than that on a single level, allowing you to build up a health pool so large that the chip damage that the game could inflict on you becomes meaningless. You can just tank most of it. You can't tank instant kills, however, which doesn't care if you're at 1 health or 1000 health, so the game's balance never breaks. Jetpack allows you to ignore ropes and the fall damage mechanics entirely, because hey look, you can fucking fly. Or being able to climb vertical walls, or see where the exit is, or throw items with such force that they defy the laws of gravity. The items in Spelunky are very powerful, but they never make you invincible. You're still vulnerable to many of the game's threats, even with all these items, because the game can instantly kill you whenever it wants. But with enough items and enough bombs, you can breeze through most of the game, to the point where the challenge can be blown away and you simply safely walk to the exit. Then it would make a lot of sense to collect as many of these items as possible, collect as much gold as possible and buy as many of these as you can. And this does impact your score. Yes, your balance is your score. You'll quickly realize that there isn't enough gold to purchase all the items you want, especially since the price increases as you traverse deeper into the cave. So then if I can't buy my way through, I'll force my way through. I'll steal all the items and become incredibly powerful. And you would be incredibly correct. This is a very common way to beat Spelunky. But it is by no means a safe way, as the shopkeepers get very angry if you accidentally breathe in their vicinity, and they are the most powerful enemy in the game. Shopkeepers are armed with a shotgun, arguably one of the most powerful weapons in the game, as it fires a spread of high damage projectiles. They also jump around unpredictably, are incredibly fast, and will shoot you dead on the spot. Even if you do manage to disarm them, they will chase you and throw you about until you've been beaten to death or they've picked up some other weapon to shoot you with. These enemies are nuts, and once angered, every single shopkeeper will be angry at you, expressing this same level of hate towards you. And there will also be a shopkeeper waiting for you at the end of every level. By taking this route, you can very easily breeze through the game's levels. You'll likely have enough bombs to blast your way through absolutely everything, and will likely have enough items to be strong enough to kill every monster. But you're always going to be vulnerable to the shopkeepers. One misstep and they will kill you. While not instantly, they will get there eventually. So the imbalanced act of stealing and becoming ultra powerful is balanced by the imbalanced shopkeepers that keep you in line. While yes, the shopkeepers can be blown away by the incredibly balanced bombs, if you don't have the foresight to predict their movements or didn't get sticky bombs, you'll be in for quite the wild ride. I did mention this earlier, but I'm going to mention it again since I'm talking about the game's balance now, the ghost and cautious play. If you could, you would inch your way through every level, but the ghost's instant kill mechanic discourages this, as extremely cautious players are then forced to sacrifice treasure they might have collected if they were a bit faster. This also explains why the damsel and tikis must be taken to the exit before you can receive their rewards, giving you extra health and a bonus gold respectively. If there was no time limit, this would be incredibly tedious and a waste of time, but since time is a resource you have to manage, you'll have to decide if it's worthwhile to carry these items all the way to the exit, juggling them as well as the held weapon you're likely going to have. This can be time consuming and spend too much time and the ghost will come to beat your ass. Deciding if it's a good idea to leave an item behind or to continue the juggling act is something you'll never have to consider without the ghost, and its simple threat adds a layer of complexity and challenge that would otherwise never exist. And that's sort of where Spelunky's perfection comes in. Everything has a reason to be designed in the way that it is. Every mechanic and every design choice builds upon the challenge of safely descending down the cave. The area that embodies this the most are the Ice Caves levels, the best designed levels in the game by far. The challenge of these levels are all built around the bottomless abyss that you can fall into if you fail a jump. Pretty big risk. On top of this, every enemy and trap becomes more challenging because of it. Mines and UFOs destroy the floor, ice surfaces makes jumping more difficult, and the Yetis can throw you off the edge. As you get closer to the exit, the risk of falling becomes increasingly higher, and falling down the wrong way can be costly without ropes. Individually, these traps and enemies are pretty forgettable, but in conjunction with the Abyss, they all become much more dangerous. That paragraph makes dying in the ice cave sound ridiculously easy to do, and you'd be correct if you don't know what you're doing. Once you've learnt that the Yetis are slow, UFOs can only shoot when you're underneath them, and even then the blast is very slow, and mines deactivate when you pick them up, you can very easily avoid these risks with clever play and quick thinking. The avoid risk with clever play and quick thinking also translates into the short whip length, and yes, this standard attack is quite pathetic. But you're not supposed to use the whip, you're supposed to use the rocks, the skulls, and people's corpses to clear the way for you. This isn't clear in the mines, but in later levels, where whipping enemies is either incredibly dangerous or impossible. This creates the challenge of using what's around you to survive, which is something that you can't rely on because of the randomly generated levels, so this really tests your mastery and knowledge of the game. Of course, with enough practice, you can use the whip far more effectively than any thrown item, although I can't recommend beginners to do this. Spelunky's world is dangerous, but predictable and consistent, and while it may seem completely unfair at first, once you're familiar with the world, the game will rarely unfairly kill you. Every design decision of the game has a reason outside of this will really troll our players, even if trolling its players is something that happens anyway. Sure, it makes the game harder, maybe even harder than it needs to be, but I can't see the game's design being almost perfect without it being hard. So when I say that Spelunky isn't a game that everyone should be playing, I sincerely mean it. Despite all of its brilliant design choices and the amount of care that's gone into it, the final version of the game isn't something that I could blindly recommend. Now that I'm mentioning it for the third time in this video, I'm hopefully going to stop repeating myself, but the game's learning curve is ridiculously steep. Some people love it, others hate it, and the ones who hate it will never play the game and will never understand why many people praise the ever-living shit out of the game. The death loop gameplay of Spelunky does vanish once you've had enough practice and have learnt to overcome the challenges the game offers. I don't think many people who dislike the game sees this. They just see, I'm not making any progress, I'm not having any fun, why am I playing this? I guess this is why I'm making this video in the first place, so people can hopefully understand why this game is so great, without suffering through playing it. You should only play Spelunky if the gameplay that I've shown you and what I've explained about it sounds like something you will really enjoy. But from someone who does really enjoy playing Spelunky, I will say that you can get burnt out on it very easily. Obtaining all the footage for this video was a big chore to do after the initial rush of, whoa, I'm playing Spelunky. I ended up doing it in hour bursts instead. The only variety in the game are the randomly generated levels, and after some time of playing the game non-stop, even those become predictable. I'm unsure to call this a flaw or not, so I'm just going to acknowledge its existence and move on. However, don't take me being burnt out on the game as something that will always happen to its players. The Spelunky community is just as strong today. Spelunky is a perfectly designed game, and I think a lot of games should admire this and learn from it. Give solid reasons for your mechanics to exist outside of adding variety. While variety certainly is the spice of life, I haven't met anyone who only eats spice. Designing a game revolving around a single mechanic, and then expanding it and balancing it, is what Spelunky does so spectacularly, and there isn't a single thing about it that I would change. Well, maybe I'd remove the dark levels. G'day you, yes you, the person who made it to the end of this video. I can't thank you enough for sticking it out and watching it all, it is quite the long video. If you enjoyed my review or critique or whatever these videos are called, then please consider subscribing. I plan to make more videos talking about games, although I can't guarantee they'll all be as positive as this video. I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but 2008 Spelunky is completely free. I'll link the download down below, and I highly recommend you check that version out. It's essentially the same game but different, and honestly slightly easier than Spelunky HD. Once again, thanks so much for watching, and I'll hopefully see you next time.